What if I told you that the person you felt destined to love, the one who needed your light, your care, your soul, was never sent to be healed by you, but to awaken the parts of yourself you've long abandoned? That the bond you can't seem to break isn't love at all, but a mirror reflecting your deepest emotional wounds. The attraction between empaths and narcissists begins far beneath the surface, within the hidden architecture of the psyche. The empath, often gentle and emotionally attuned, is not simply someone who understands others' emotions. They are someone who has spent years navigating emotional landscapes without maps. This sensitivity is not only a gift, but a survival mechanism, usually born from early exposure to emotional unpredictability. Somewhere in the empath's developmental years, they may have learned that their role in relationships was to feel deeply for others in order to stay safe or to be loved. This creates a psychic imbalance, a strong connection to the needs and pain of others, but a disconnection from their own unmet desires and unresolved emotional material. These unresolved fragments form part of what is known as the shadow, the unconscious part of the self that contains all that has been repressed, rejected, or denied. The narcissist, by contrast, appears confident, self-contained, and dominant, but beneath the surface lies a deeply fragile inner world. Their inflated sense of superiority is not rooted in authentic self-worth, but in the construction of a false persona designed to ward off shame, vulnerability, and emotional dependence. They reject the very traits the empath embodies: sensitivity, vulnerability, and emotional honesty. This disowned emotional reality becomes part of the narcissist's own shadow, projected outward and seen as weakness in others. On the psychic plane, what the empath disowns, assertiveness, boundaries, self-prioritization, the narcissist often over-identifies with. Likewise, what the narcissist disowns, emotional depth, vulnerability, authenticity, the empath embodies. Thus, a hidden symbiosis forms. The unconscious seeks wholeness. It is drawn toward the integration of opposites. When the empath meets the narcissist, the unconscious recognizes something, a familiar pattern, an echo from the past, or perhaps a piece of the self that has gone missing. The narcissist appears as someone powerful, certain, and captivating. The empath, attuned to inner wounds, senses a damaged soul beneath the bravado. But this attraction is not romantic in the conventional sense. It is archetypal. It is the pull between yin and yang, anima and animus, shadow and persona. It is the ancient dance between healer and wounded, between seeker and mirror. The magnetic pull is not based on logic, but on the needs of the soul to reconcile what has been divided. Neither the empath nor the narcissist fully understands why they are drawn together. The connection feels fated, often intense and confusing. It is not because of complementary personalities alone, but because of unconscious material seeking expression and resolution through the relationship. The empath's light calls to the narcissist's darkness, while the narcissist's wounds activate the empath's need to heal on both sides. Something hidden is calling to be seen. But the path this connection takes depends entirely on whether the empath remains asleep to their own shadow or begins the difficult work of bringing it into conscious awareness. The pull will persist as long as the inner fragmentation does. The empath often walks through life carrying a silent vow that love has the power to redeem even the most broken soul. This vow is not made consciously, but arises from early life experiences where love had to be earned, often through emotional labor. In many cases, the empath was once a child in a chaotic or emotionally unavailable environment where soothing the moods of a parent or caretaker became a means of survival. Over time, this behavior solidified into an identity. The caregiver, the healer, the emotional anchor. They began to believe that if they could just feel enough, understand enough, or give enough, they could fix others and finally receive the love they longed for. This is why, when the narcissist enters their life, the empath does not see a manipulator, but a wounded soul in disguise. The narcissist rarely reveals their true nature at first. They are skilled at wearing masks, presenting a version of themselves that appears charismatic, intelligent, even loving. To the empath, this initial connection feels electric and affirming, as though they are finally seen and appreciated for who they are. The narcissist showers them with attention, creating a deep sense of emotional intimacy that feels rare and magical. But underneath this performance is a hunger, not for mutual love, but for control, validation, and narcissistic supply. The narcissist is drawn to the empath precisely because of their willingness to give without limit and question without confrontation. As the relationship progresses, subtle shifts begin. The warmth turns cold, praise turns into criticism, and presence gives way to absence. Yet the empath clings to the memory of the initial connection, believing it was real and that something must have gone wrong. They blame themselves, thinking they were not loving or patient enough. This is the core of the trap. The empath believes the narcissist's wounded inner child can be healed with devotion. They tell themselves that their love can crack the narcissist's defenses, reach the true self buried beneath the layers of pride, manipulation, and avoidance. But the narcissist is not on a journey of healing. They are on a quest for dominance, and they view empathy not as a gift, but as an opening to exploit. Still, the empath remains. Each emotional withdrawal by the narcissist is interpreted as a cry for more love, more understanding, more sacrifice. The empath begins to pour from a well that is not only deep but also self-draining. They give until they lose touch with their own needs and identity. What makes this dynamic so difficult to escape is the illusion that healing is just around the corner, that if they just endure a little longer, love will finally break through. But the narcissist is not engaged in the same emotional reality. They are not invested in mutual growth, only in maintaining the upper hand. The empath, trapped in the delusion of transformation, becomes emotionally enslaved by their own hope. It is not the narcissist that binds them, but their belief that love should save even those who do not seek redemption. The bond that forms between the empath and the narcissist is not just emotional but deeply psychological, rooted in unresolved trauma and the unconscious repetition of early life experiences. For many empaths, love was never consistent or safe in childhood. It was something they had to earn, something conditional, often given and withdrawn unpredictably. In response to this, the empath developed hyper-awareness of emotional cues, a need to please, and a deep longing to be accepted. This pattern becomes ingrained, forming the foundation of their adult relationships. When they encounter the narcissist, this old template is triggered, not by familiarity alone, but because the narcissist mimics the inconsistency of that original caregiver. The empath is thrown back into the emotional reality of their past, unconsciously believing that if they can make this person love them, they will finally be worthy. The narcissist by nature operates on cycles: idealization, devaluation, and discard. In the beginning, they shower the empath with affection and admiration, creating an intoxicating sense of being valued. This phase taps into the empath's unmet need to be deeply seen and cherished. But once the narcissist secures emotional dependency, they begin to withdraw that affection, creating confusion and forcing them to work harder to regain that initial warmth. This triggers what is known as a trauma bond, a powerful emotional attachment formed through repeated cycles of reward and punishment. Each return of affection feels like relief from emotional starvation, reinforcing the empath's belief that love is something that must be fought for. This cycle mirrors what psychologists call repetition compulsion, an unconscious drive to recreate early relational wounds in the hope of achieving a different outcome. The empath is not simply in love with the narcissist, they are trying to rewrite their emotional history. Each time the narcissist pulls away or inflicts emotional harm, the empath interprets it as a test they must pass. If they can just be more patient, more forgiving, more understanding, maybe this time they will be loved unconditionally. But the narcissist is not playing the same game. They are not seeking resolution. They are feeding on the empath's emotional energy, using inconsistency as a tool of control. The empath, meanwhile, becomes increasingly consumed. Their self-worth becomes tied to how the narcissist perceives them. They begin to mistrust their own perceptions, second-guess their feelings, and prioritize the narcissist's moods above their own well-being. The trauma bond keeps them emotionally tethered, even when logic tells them to leave. It's not just fear or dependency, it's the unconscious compulsion to finish an unfinished story, to heal a wound that the narcissist continues to reopen. This dynamic creates a powerful prison, one in which the bars are made not of control from the outside, but of hope, memory, and the need for emotional redemption. The empath becomes trapped in a psychological loop where the pain feels familiar, the hope addictive, and the love they seek always just out of reach. The empath's journey through a relationship with a narcissist is not merely a tragic tale of emotional exploitation, but a profound confrontation with their own psyche. The narcissist, in all their manipulation, coldness, and self-centeredness, acts as a dark mirror, reflecting the parts of the empath that have been long repressed. What begins as love quickly transforms into a spiritual initiation, a descent into the underworld of the self. The narcissist, without ever intending to, forces the empath to examine their boundaries, their compulsive need to be needed, and their pattern of self-abandonment masked as unconditional love. This is not a lesson offered gently. It is delivered through emotional chaos, confusion, and suffering. The empath is brought to the edge of their emotional endurance, stripped of illusions, and made to see what they have hidden even from themselves. The dynamic demands that the empath ask themselves why they remain in a situation that depletes them. At first, the answer may seem obvious: love, loyalty, hope. But deeper inquiry reveals something more complex. The empath discovers that they have derived identity and purpose from caregiving, that their sense of worth is tied to being indispensable. In the narcissist's world, they become everything: caretaker, rescuer, stabilizer. But this role, though noble in appearance, is born from a deep wound, the belief that love must be earned through sacrifice. As the narcissist continues to take without reciprocating, the empath is slowly confronted with the painful truth that their love is being used as a form of self-erasure. This pain is necessary. It tears through the idealized image the empath holds of themselves, the healer, the forgiver, the endlessly strong. Beneath it lies rage, grief, and a desperate need to be seen. The narcissist brings these emotions to the surface, not with empathy, but by triggering them. Their coldness activates the empath's inner child, the one who is overlooked, minimized, or emotionally burdened. The empath must now decide whether to continue suppressing this child, or to begin the painful process of listening to it. This is the moment when suffering can become transformation. The empath, once externally focused, turns inward. They begin to question not just the narcissist but themselves, their motives, their patterns, their beliefs about love and self-worth. The narcissist, for all their destructiveness, becomes the catalyst for this awakening. In this sense, they play the role of the unconscious teacher. They do not teach with wisdom or compassion, but through contrast and cruelty. They show the empath the cost of living without boundaries, the danger of equating love with martyrdom, and the emptiness of self-neglect disguised as virtue. The empath, once broken, has a chance to become whole, not by fixing the narcissist, but by reclaiming the parts of themselves they gave away. They must face the shadow within, the parts they denied while tending to others, and in doing so, they begin the long, painful ascent out of the emotional entanglement, not as a victim, but as someone who has finally met themselves. The relationship between the empath and the narcissist is not only a psychological entanglement, but a clash of inner identities constructed around survival. The narcissist projects a false self to the world, a grandiose, confident, invulnerable persona designed to hide deep feelings of shame and inadequacy. This mask is not an act of deception in the usual sense. It is a psychological armor formed early in life to protect a fragile ego from being shattered by rejection or emotional pain. The narcissist cannot afford to be vulnerable, so they perform a version of self that demands attention, admiration, and control. Any threat to this constructed identity is met with rage, dismissal, or manipulation. They cannot receive love in its raw, authentic form, because love implies openness, and openness invites exposure to the very wounds they cannot acknowledge. The empath, on the other hand, also wears a mask, though it is far more subtle. Their identity is built around being good, kind, selfless, and understanding. But this, too, is a defense. Deep within the empath is often a fear of abandonment, rejection, or being unworthy unless they are useful. They learn to derive their sense of self not from inner validation, but from how deeply they can serve and heal others. In many ways, they unconsciously believe that love must be earned through suffering, and that their ability to give endlessly is proof of their value. This leads to a dangerous illusion that their emotional generosity will eventually melt the narcissist's coldness. But this illusion is not rooted in reality. It is rooted in the empath's own inability to confront their suppressed desires and unmet needs. When these two identities collide, a toxic cycle emerges. The narcissist is drawn to the empath's emotional depth because it offers what they lack: empathy, warmth, compassion. Yet they do not seek this depth to share or connect. They seek it to feed their hollow sense of self. The empath, in turn, is attracted to the narcissist's apparent strength and self-assuredness, mistaking it for authenticity and emotional maturity. They fail to see that this confidence is hollow, built on denial and distortion. The empath becomes entangled in trying to earn love from someone who is incapable of genuine emotional reciprocity. Freedom for the empath begins when they let go of the identity they cling to, the one that says they must always be the giver, the healer, the morally superior one. This false goodness is not sustainable. And in serving others at the expense of the self, the empath becomes complicit in their own emotional starvation. To break the cycle, the empath must risk being seen not as perfect or endlessly loving, but as human, flawed, complex, and in need of care themselves. They must begin to value their own boundaries, needs, and voice as much as they value compassion. Only then can they step out of the dance, not by changing the narcissist, but by refusing to play a role that was never true to who they really are. When the mask falls, true freedom begins. The empath's inability to escape the narcissist is not only due to emotional dependency or external manipulation, but because they have yet to face and integrate the aspects of themselves they unconsciously reject. The narcissist represents a powerful projection of the empath's inner wounds and unacknowledged traits, serving as a mirror to the parts of their psyche they have tried to disown. The empath may see themselves as pure, selfless, and endlessly forgiving, but beneath that image often lies a deep fear of being alone, unloved, or seen as selfish. These are traits the empath has pushed into the shadow, the inner psychological space that holds everything we deny or suppress. As long as these shadow aspects remain unacknowledged, the empath will continue to attract relationships that reflect them in distorted and painful ways. The narcissist forces the empath to confront their hidden desires for control, significance, and validation. Although the empath consciously gives, they may unconsciously expect transformation in return, believing that their love should lead to gratitude, change, or healing in the other. When this does not happen, frustration, resentment, and helplessness begin to build. These emotions reveal that beneath the altruism lies a deep yearning to be recognized and chosen. The narcissist's coldness and emotional unavailability activate the empath's most vulnerable fears, the fear of being invisible, unworthy, or not good enough. And so the empath tries harder, gives more, and suffers silently, believing that self-sacrifice is the highest form of love. This belief is rooted in a deeper psychological pattern, the need to earn love through endurance. The empath often mistakes martyrdom for strength and sees boundaries as abandonment. But in truth, this self-denial feeds the cycle of emotional abuse. The narcissist thrives on the empath's inability to say no, their tendency to explain instead of confront, and their fear of conflict. The empath becomes the perfect source of narcissistic supply, not because they are weak, but because they are disconnected from their own shadow. They have not yet made peace with the parts of themselves that feel anger, that want to say no, that demand to be seen and valued without performing. True escape from the narcissist does not begin with physical distance, but with inner transformation. The empath must begin the process of shadow integration, facing the parts of themselves they were taught to suppress. They must allow themselves to feel rage without shame, to express need without guilt, and to set boundaries without fear of losing love. This process is not easy. It requires a painful unraveling of false beliefs and emotional conditioning. But with each step toward authenticity, the empath becomes stronger, more whole, and less susceptible to manipulation. When they no longer seek validation from pain, when they no longer confuse control with love, the narcissist loses their grip. The relationship dissolves, not through conflict, but through awakening. The empath no longer vibrates at the frequency of sacrifice, but resonates with self-worth, and in that shift, they reclaim their freedom, not only from the narcissist, but from the internal chains that once bound them. The relationship between the empath and the narcissist is not a simple case of good versus evil, giver versus taker, or light versus dark. It is a sacred confrontation between two wounded psyches acting out unconscious scripts, one running from vulnerability, the other clinging to it. The empath is not merely a victim, but a soul on the edge of transformation, called to wake up from the illusion that love means sacrifice and healing means suffering. Until they turn inward, face their shadow, and reclaim the power they gave away in the name of love, they will remain entangled in a loop that feels like fate, but is actually repetition. True freedom begins not when the narcissist changes, but when the empath chooses themselves. In that courageous act of self-recognition, the chain breaks, not only around their heart, but around their entire identity,